My boss thinks she's untouchable because her mom runs the show, so I trick her into quitting. Here's what happened. Subscribe to Am I the Jerk on YouTube and hit the bell for notifications. This isn't my story, but I was able to witness it in all its glory because I used to work for one of the people involved. Years ago, I used to work at a state government agency where my boss was a political appointee. Her mom was a bigwig in our governor's party who wrangled a political appointment for her daughter, which meant she had some clout behind her. Let's call her Shannon. Shannon was not good at her job at all. She was frequently out of the office for meetings. A lot of the time, this was 2-hour lunches, coffee with friends, and a bit of shopping. She was also a bully and a tyrant. She would bully her staff and would hold the threat of firing over everyone's head to get them to do what she wanted. She wasn't a micromanager because she was never around enough to actually micromanage anything, but she was widely disliked throughout the entire building. This was a large agency, so to have a building where almost everyone disliked you took a lot of work. The problem is that as a political employee, she was untouchable. The people who had the power to fire her couldn't because of her family. Even the number 3 person in the agency couldn't do it, and he was a political appointee as well. But after a year of mystery meetings and time out of the office, her excuses were catching up to her. The agency director removed her from her job and put her in charge of special projects. Anyone who's worked a corporate job knows that people get put in charge of special projects because they were largely incapable of doing their previous job. They didn't get fired, but they no longer had any power. This was Shannon's case. For a while, she seemed to get the message. She shaped up, didn't have any more mystery meetings, didn't disappear from the building for 2 hours, and treated people somewhat nicely. Of course, it didn't last, and Shannon returned to her old ways. Around that time, we got a new assistant director. We'll call her Trisha, who was also a political appointee. She was the number 2 person in the whole agency, and she was great to work for. She was very serious about her job. She had access to Shannon's electronic calendar and saw what Shannon had been up to. She then cross-checked the security logs to see when Shannon was in and out of the building. After her brief investigation, Trisha emailed Shannon with a list of dates and said, "Can you tell me more about these different meetings you were having and why they took so long?" Well, Shannon wasn't having any of that. How dare Trisha call her character into question? This was an outrage. It was so outrageous, in fact, that Shannon wrote a resignation letter and slammed it down on Trisha's desk. That'll show her. After a few hours, Shannon had time to think about what she'd done. She remembered that she had a 1-year-old at home, and she also remembered that her husband was an unskilled local delivery driver who made $8 an hour, and remembered she was the primary breadwinner of her family. She went back, hat in hand, and apologized for her attitude. She said she was willing to try harder, and she asked Trisha if she could possibly please have her letter back. Pretty please? Trisha said, "Oh, I'm sorry, you're too late. I already processed the letter and sent it off to HR. I'm afraid I can't undo that." Do you remember in the movie The Incredibles when Mr. Incredible fought the giant ball with legs? The ball was so indestructible and powerful that the only thing that could beat it was itself. This was that moment. The previously untouchable political employee had just been fired by the only political employee that had power, herself. And rather than protect her or do her a solid, Trisha would not undo her self-termination. She just let Shannon be her own undoing. When news of Shannon's self-firing raced through the building, you could hear the cries of, "What? Are you serious?" followed by howls of laughter as each new person heard the story. Shannon was out, and everyone who had to deal with her was much happier than they'd ever been in that job. I really do like the comparison to the Incredibles scene here. Honestly, people like that are the worst. They know they don't have to do their job well because they're not going to get fired. I guess she never considered the fact that she'd end up firing herself. I mean, it wasn't like she was going to get fired over it either way, if this is really how this place worked. There might have been an uncomfortable conversation where she had to admit to doing something wrong, God forbid, but apparently that was just too much for her to handle. Instead, it's much easier to just throw away that great job that you can't get fired from and don't even do. That sounds like the better option, right? You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below. And don't forget to subscribe. I told my husband he was being ridiculous when he gave me a list of expectations for his birthday month. My husband is turning 30 next month. It's clearly a big deal for him, and he wanted to rightfully be pampered and feel special on this occasion. But the thing is that he came up with a list and called it birthday month expectations. I didn't know what that meant till he started reading the list out loud, which consisted of things he expects throughout the month. To give a few examples, A, he's not to be asked to do any type of chores or clean or cook for a month. B, he gets to play with his Xbox for hours on end without me interrupting or nagging him about it. C, he is not to pay his part of the rent this month. D, he gets to go out with his friends whenever he wants. And E, he gets to skip any given workday and sleep in without being bothered to wake up to drive our son to school or do any emergency fixes. In other words, he wants a month-long vacation and time off from his responsibilities as a partner and as a father. I said, "Are you being serious right now?" And he made a face and said, "Oh, no worries. This will only last for a month." I called him ridiculous and said absolutely not. I do not agree on anything on that list, and said his expectations for his birthday month were out of line. Now, I have to mention that we both work, but I do the majority of household chores and the majority of our son's care, as well as the majority of rent, bills, and internet payments. And I cannot afford to do what he's expecting me to do because we're already struggling, and I need his help, especially now, not for him to make demands. He pitched a fit, giving me grief about how I'm being selfish towards his wants, and that in my place, he would have agreed to do all he could to make my birthday month the happiest month of the year for me. I argued that birthday month is just unheard of, and just flat out ridiculous. But he said that I don't understand because his parents did this for him for years, and so did his friends. Apparently something he never told me. So as his wife, I should be happy to do it as well. But I declined and refused to take it, and keep arguing about it with him, but he hasn't stopped talking about how disappointed he was that I treat his birthday like that. Now he's been avoiding being near me and making me feel like maybe I went too far here. Am I the jerk? Look, I get turning 30 can be a big deal for a lot of people. For some reason, that seems to be a major yardstick where you no longer feel young. But honestly, it's just another day. It's not like suddenly you turn 30 and your whole life changes. Everything's still the same as it was the day before. You needing a whole month to process you turning 30 is just a little insane. Like I said, with everything still being the same as it was the day before, those obligations are still there, being your wife and son. This guy sounds like he just wants to be single and 20 again. But sorry, that's not how the world works. I could understand maybe a weekend or something, but a whole month is just asking way too much from your significant other. Sorry to be the bearer of bad news, but you still need to pull your weight. My boyfriend threw a temper tantrum because I refused to name our daughter after a character from Twilight. My boyfriend and I are both 18 and 35 weeks pregnant with our daughter. Since the day I found out we were having a girl, he was bent on naming her Renesmee and absolutely refuses to compromise. He's a massive Twilight fan. I personally hate it and would much rather that we don't name our baby after a fictional character. It kinda hit a boiling point last night. For weeks I've been telling him we're coming up with something else because I'm not naming my child that. I went on Instagram where he'd posted a picture of us and said in the caption, "I can't wait to meet you, Renesmee." I got really mad at this. I told him to delete that or change the caption because I'm not naming our daughter that. He refused, saying his friends knew now, so we had to stick with it. I said, I haven't agreed to naming our daughter after some stupid made-up character from the worst books ever made. Delete the post now or get the heck out of my house. He left to spend the night at a friend's, and my parents, who heard the argument, said I should just let him name our daughter that, saying it probably means a lot to him and that I'm being an unreasonable jerk. Am I the jerk? No, I'm sorry. I'm 100% with our original poster here. For one, I don't like that name, personally. I'm sure there's a lot of people that do, but that just doesn't sound great to me. Second, the only reason you have attachment to this character is because it's from a set of books that you like. In 10 years, you could feel entirely different about that content and look back and think, why the heck was I ever reading that? I get it. It's got lots of fans and a lot of them are diehards, but you don't need to go naming your kids after the characters. Not to mention the super manipulative move he pulled on Instagram, trying to essentially force this name on our original poster. I feel like naming your baby should be handled the way Ross and Rachel did it on Friends. You can veto any name you don't like. At the end of the day, it's your kid, and that's what their name's gonna be for the rest of yours and their lives. You don't want it to be something that you hate. Entitled mother lies about her kid's age to try and save a couple bucks at the movie theater, but gets caught in her lie and ends up having to spend a lot more. So this happened about 10 years ago when I worked at the box office of a movie theater, before automated machines were the norm. Adult tickets, 14 plus, were $11.99. Kids, 3 to 13, were $9.50. And kids under 3 were free. I had a woman come to my till with 2 kids. Now, these kids look to be about 15, though it can be hard to tell sometimes. Since most kids don't carry any kind of ID, the rule of thumb was to sell either a kid's ticket or adult ticket based on how old the adult told us the kids were. Many people would abuse this and say the kids were only 13 in order to save a few bucks. Typically, I didn't care, as I understood the prices were pretty high and this was a big chain, so a few older kids getting cheaper tickets wasn't a big deal. What was different this time is that the woman was very rude throughout the whole transaction. We have a series of questions we have to ask throughout the transaction, like asking about our loyalty program and things like that, and would randomly get scored by mystery shoppers to ensure we were following the script. This woman was annoyed and short with me throughout the whole transaction when I was being super friendly and just trying to do my job. When we got to the part about what kind of ticket she needed, it went something like this. How old are the kids? Why? So I know whether they need kids tickets or adult tickets. What's the difference? Adult tickets are 14 plus and are $11.99. Kids tickets are for 3 to 13 and are $9.50. Oh, they're 13. Okay, and which film would you like to go see today? She said whatever film it was they were going to see, I can't remember. Okay, no problem. And for 2 kids and 1 adult, that'll be $30.99 total. Actually, I'm not going with them, I'm just dropping them off. Unfortunately, this movie's 14A, which means you either have to be 14 or accompanied by an adult to see it. Well, they're 14. You just told me they're 13. They're actually 14. I just didn't want to pay the price for adult tickets. Unfortunately, you told me they were 13. Unless you have ID that shows they're 14, I have to assume what you told me first was correct, and can't allow them to watch this movie unsupervised, as it's 14A. This is ridiculous! So what are my options? They can either go to a different movie that's not 14A, or you'll have to buy a ticket and accompany them to this one. After a lot of back and forth about options, she finally decided to bite the bullet and buy an adult ticket to accompany them. I like to think she spent the next 2 hours reflecting on how her attempt to save $5 ended up costing her $11.99 and 2 hours of her time. Realistically, she likely bought the ticket, accompanied them into the theater, and then left them there to watch the movie while she went shopping. Either way, it still cost her the extra $11.99 for her ticket. This one's a little understandable. I think everyone tries to pull a maneuver like this at some point with their kids, right? They're riding that age line where things start to cost a little more if you say how old they really are, so you try and milk it a little longer. I get it. Being a parent's expensive. You try and save a couple bucks everywhere you can. I would be completely understanding if you weren't being rude to the staff along the way. They're just doing their job and they quite frankly don't need to take your crap. You tried to pull a fast one, and they were willing to let you do it too. You just didn't realize that you'd kinda screwed yourself. HR insists on a photocopy of my degree, but can't even read it because it's written in Latin. I worked for a big American technology and defense firm with tens of thousands of employees. A senior executive who had worked there successfully for years was caught with a falsification on his resume. He was fired immediately, and a new policy was instituted, requiring all employees to sign a form giving the company permission to query the college or university with their highest claimed degree for verification. I have a doctorate from an old prestigious European university, an institution that I was quite sure would have no interest in such a query. But whatever, I signed the permission form and attached a note warning the company that the university would probably ignore the request, which it did. After a month or two with no response, HR called me in and said that the university had not responded, as I had warned them, but that corporate would accept a photocopy of my degree. Fine, I'm good with that. Remember the old prestigious European university part? My degree is a piece of actual parchment about the size of a throw rug, with a wax seal about a centimeter thick and written entirely in Latin. So I bring it to the office and photocopy it a bit at a time by sliding it around on the photocopier window. Takes about 12 pages to get it all. I staple them into a pile and give it to HR, who reluctantly pass it on to corporate. Another month passes. HR calls me again. Corporate's complaining that your degree is written in a foreign language. Yep, it's in Latin. Tell them to find a priest to translate it. And I walked out. Never heard from them again about it. Edit for clarification. 1. This took place well over 20 years ago when stuff like this didn't happen all on the web. Snail mail and paper were the standard. 2. Commenters are taking the throw rug simile a little too literally. It is quite large but would make a rather measly throw rug. 3. My work was in the civilian sector and did not require clearance. The fact that I'm an American with a foreign PhD did not cause any hassle. Okay, I'm glad he clarified the size of this thing because I was literally picturing something that he'd be tucking under his arm to carry into work. I gotta say, I didn't know that this was a thing, but that's kinda cool. That's something that you get in Europe that you really don't get in North America. That ancient, really cool, historical kinda stuff. I guarantee, no matter how old and prestigious a place is here, I doubt they're writing their degrees out on scrolls in Latin. That's a European exclusive. Once they found out it was written in Latin, they probably just decided it wasn't worth it. I typically let my employees all go about a half hour to 45 minutes early, but that stops when you take it for granted. This didn't happen today, but a few years ago. I was part of a security team for a large public building. Since the building had to be available to the public for more than 8 hours per day, we had 2 shifts. Early shift, 6 a.m. to 2 p.m., and late shift, 10 a.m. to 6 p.m. I was the supervisor on the late shift. My staff consisted of me and 6 guards, including a guy I'll call Jersey. The building closed at 5 p.m., which meant no more people could come in, but the employees and public inside could finish their business and leave. At the end of the day, our job was to ensure the building was clear of people, lock all the appropriate interior doors, set the alarms, and leave at 6. Since it didn't take 7 of us to complete this, I would allow all staff except 1 to leave at about 5:15 or 5:30. By then, 90% of the people were gone. The daily designated staff member and I could handle the closing tasks. The staff would rotate who stayed with me each day, and the system worked out well for all involved. This meant everyone was getting off work 30 to 45 minutes early every day, and still getting paid for a full day. One morning, at around 9:30, we had a minor crisis in the building, and I needed a staff member to handle it. I knew it would take most of the day, so I didn't want one of the early shift guys to handle it or it would incur overtime. 2 or 3 of my guys, including Jersey, were in the locker room getting ready to start their shift. I asked Jersey to grab his gear and go handle the issue. He looked at me and said, technically I ain't on the clock yet. I told him he was correct and to never mind. I grabbed a day shift person to handle the issue and the day progressed as normal. 5:15 rolls around and I wander into the locker room. I see my guys all getting ready to leave, including Jersey. I asked them where they're going. They told me which employee was staying with me and that he was still at his post. I glanced around the room, then locked eyes with Jersey and said, You know, you're technically still on the clock. Nobody leaves before 6. It was dead silent as I walked out of the locker room. I have no idea what was said to him in the locker room, but I bet it wasn't pretty. We all stayed late that day, and no one said a word about it to me. However, the following morning, Jersey was in my office waiting for me when I arrived. He said, "Hey boss, I'm sorry about yesterday morning. I was out of line. You won't hear that from me ever again. Whatever you need, I'm here." We returned to normal operations after that, and I had no trouble getting someone to step up on occasion. As a boss, I'll do whatever I can to take care of my employees, but I expect a little flexibility from them in return. Yeah, Jersey really kinda screwed everyone that day. This is actually the opposite of what most people have to deal with, and we've talked about it more than a few times on this channel, where your boss is counting the minutes that you're off the clock, like for your lunch and stuff like that, to make sure you're there the second you're supposed to be, and won't hesitate to ask you to stay late. Our original poster in this case was actually really being nice to his employees, giving them plenty of time to leave early almost every day and still get paid for that time. Given that they're taking pretty good care of you, I wouldn't take that for granted. If he asks you to start a half hour early when he gives you a half hour off at the end of almost every day, just do it. Return the favor. When you subscribe, make sure to hit the bell to turn on notifications. Put the playlist on in the background to finish listening to all the stories. Or if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode. If you like Am I the Jerk, give Am I the Genius a shot. Everything linked in the description.